welcome to episode 3 of the Belief Books podcast. And this person in your ears is Josh Naiman. This series was never going to be a podcast. I actually wanted to create a mini documentary series, videos. So instead of recording an interview with my next guest over Skype, I drove from Indianapolis to New York City and back in 2 days to film the interview. Roughly 24 hours of driving. Luckily, I didn't have to do it alone. But I'm already getting ahead of myself. So early on, this was March of 2017, as I was developing my series, I decided it was time to start connecting with people to interview. I went to town researching and messaging and emailing all sorts of people and companies, organizations that I found who were in the climate change game in some way. Both sides, by the way. With only very few responses, but I persisted.
It's more about harnessing what you do have, harnessing the people who already know, people who already agree, and turning that into a collective force toward action and tangible results that you need to make happen. I think too much emphasis has been placed on trying to convince the people that don't agree.
Twitter is an unbelievable resource, and one I continually underestimate. It's probably where most of my activity, social media-wise, happens. And through my searching on Twitter, I found a page named @Climo 2017. The description said they were an environmental activist community for the furthering of experimental technologies. Okay, I thought, perfect, I've got to look into this. So I visited their website and I was immediately hooked when I read this. STEP, Solar Thermal Electrochemical Process, is a technological initiative developed by Professor Stuart Licht at George Washington University. The process is capable of converting atmospheric CO2 into usable carbon nanofibers. And it gets better. The paragraph goes on. According to Licht's team, we calculate that with a physical area less than 10% the size of the Sahara Desert, our process could remove enough CO2 to decrease atmospheric levels to those of the pre-industrial revolution within 10 years. I sent a direct message to Climo immediately on Twitter, and that was it. We talked right away and set up a date for me to come out to interview these guys. They even suggested that I interview 2 of them. So not only the founder, Fergus Baumann, but also an active volunteer, Owen Campbell. So that was awesome. You'll meet Owen in another episode here in the future. For now, I want you to meet Fergus.
Even as someone who cares about climate change, there's a part of your mind that is in denial about it because it doesn't feel like it's really happening. You know, you go outside and everything feels normal. And so the urgency is kind of downplayed just because of that visceral engagement. But this is massive. Climate change out of the picture. This technology is incredible.
All right. So at the end of last April, it was time to make my 12-hour journey to New York to meet my new activist friends. But I didn't do it alone. My dad swooped in at the last minute and offered to come help me and drive and support me, which was really cool. So he gets production assistant and driver credit on this one. Fergus sent me an address for an art framing studio in Midtown Manhattan, just a handful of blocks away from Times Square. Okay, put that in the GPS, and we were rolling. While one of us drove, the other slept in the back seat, and we went on and off like that the whole way there and back. And because of my schedule, we had to drive straight through, only stopping for gas and food and the necessary bathroom stuff. But it was a really cool experience to have him there with me for some of the early production of this series. And also, I don't think I could have made it driving alone. I would have been way too tired. So thanks, Dad. Anyways, we arrived with 1 hour to spare before the meeting with Fergus and Owen. 1 hour. Before we knew it, we found ourselves 3 floors up in that art framing studio. I set up really quick with the help of my dad, and we were ready to record. So here we go.
Our organization is under the name Climo, as it stands. We started as a group of students and a number of activists who were interested in looking for a CO2 conversion technology which could potentially mitigate the greenhouse crisis without necessarily having to go through the legislative scene. We view that, for the time being as being really, really blocked with lobbyist influence and hard to get anything done in a timely manner. And because there's such a time window on this, that's why we went that route. And so we were looking for one or two to sort of coalesce around, and our research brought us to a technology called Solar Thermal Electrochemical Process.
Can you say that one more time, slower?
Solar Thermal Electrochemical Process, which even slower or shorter would be referred to as STEP. And it's a sort of emerging technology. It's existed since 2009-ish. And what it does is it converts atmospheric and stack emission CO2 into a building material called carbon nanofibers. And carbon nanotubes as well, more recently, they've been able to manufacture. So only since 2015 have they sort of honed the conversion process toward nanofibers. They were making graphite before, and it kind of happened accidentally that they ended up doing this. And we'll probably go more into the ins and outs of the technology. But the gist of where we come in here is we were reading studies and articles and interviews by the research team, the Licht group, and the leader of the group, Stuart Licht, was quoted as saying that the group was calculating that the technology could take atmospheric CO2 levels down to pre-industrial within a 10-year period. So we came in for publicity on behalf of the technology. We're not affiliated with the Licht group. We're not paid by the Licht group. We introduced ourselves to them just several months ago. We're in regular contact with them now. But our role is to grow a marketing base, grow a following, and try to, on one level, be a facilitator of educational content on behalf of the technology, and on another level, to grow a messaging campaign that can reach larger and larger conglomerates that are friendly towards subsidizing technologies like this. Ultimately, we hope to reach billionaire conglomerates.
Wow, yeah. So that's like the overview. But we still don't know who you are. So who are you and what do you do with the organization?
I'm running oversight over the rest of our membership, which consists of a couple of volunteers across the country who are helping us locate professors and chemical engineers who might provide us testimony on the technology. I'm also involved in the process of collecting and archiving those people, and also larger networks of people who we might be affiliated with in the corporate world in terms of donor conglomerates. So I'm doing a lot of research. I'm also primarily responsible for creating the educational content. So I'm generating scripts and narrating videos. I'm running a lot of social media stuff. We've got a couple of people helping with that as well. And networking alongside my collaborator, Owen Campbell. We're working on making partnerships with advertising organizations and people in film, TV, media world who might help us with the campaign in the future.
Great. Okay. So how old is Climo?
The organization Climo as an entity is 2 months old. We officially launched the campaign on January 29th of 2017, and we were conducting research in the background, not under any particular name, for 6 to 8 months probably before then, trying to find an appropriate technology. But as an entity, we're 2 months old, we're not incorporated, we're considering incorporation, we're considering 501c3 status. So as it stands now, we're broadly an activist community.
From what I understand, you guys knew that you wanted to do something about this issue. and then you went out and looked at people who were trying to solve the problem, and then you found the STEP program, which is done by LIC. Okay. So what drove you to do this? Why do you care?
A will to survive. One thing that we're trying to really emphasize in this campaign is that our backgrounds are not in the chemical sciences, really any sciences at all. We grew up in the theater world, we're artists, and most of our community are artists. We have a sort of offshoot activist community as well. I've done a lot of political activism over the course of my life, but Climo and our members don't come from and aren't affiliated with people in the realm of authority, be it in the political world, in monetarily speaking, or in the scientific community. And that's not our background. We're self-taught in terms of chemistry, and we're networking in those domains as well to try to incorporate more people with that background. And of course, we're in communications with the LIT group, so we have them to go to for clarification on stuff. We are learning as we go. We're doing what we have to do to get the attention on this thing, and we feel like our role, because of our backgrounds in publicity, is where we can have most of the effect. But we're very alarmed by the impending situation of climate change and are concerned, not just because we live in New York City, but because it really poses a threat to the survival of the entire species when it comes to wars over basic resources, which could have nuclear implications. So we're interested in our survival. That's why we're doing this.
I appreciate that,
yeah.
and would agree. So you aren't directly being funded by the LICT group or anything like that. You guys just are almost like a supporting activist group, an organization that supports their endeavors.
Yeah. So our programmatic model is kind of unusual. There aren't a lot of auxiliary groups that support other organizations or other research initiatives like we do. I don't think there is a precedent for our campaign within the realm of scientific research as far as running a campaign on someone else's behalf. You see it sometimes in the case of orchestras. You'll see sometimes affiliate people do marketing and stuff for people in music, but that's really the closest model that you could draw. Maybe super PACs might be something like it, but super PACs they're not really separate. They're sort of a guise of separation. We are literally a separate organization from the LIT group and are not looking to monetize the campaign or profit on it in any way. So there are some difficulties that come along with, because there aren't a lot of facilities or there aren't a lot of larger umbrella organizations that facilitate the kind of campaign we're running. But at the same time, we feel like because of who we're connected to, we have a lot of potential to grow the campaign, and that given the political scene, our method would be more expedient than the sort of prototypical methods that are being tried right now, given the time window.
I see, yeah, I was just about to ask, what is the particular reason why, you didn't join up with the LICT group and create this bigger thing, but it's more strategic going about it from a different angle?
Yeah, there's a psychological aspect to not being affiliated with them in terms of people feeling like this is a really organic sort of grassroots campaign, and we're not just sort of profiteering or self-promoting for the purpose of getting grants for our research project. And I feel like, on the one hand, as far as Stuart Lick's ability to access funding, which has been very, very minimal, part of it has to do with the lack of time, inability to campaign, that isn't their forte, and because they're competing against all kinds of other conversion technologies or just other research initiatives that are also interested in accessing funding. And so they're just one of a big mass. And we want to create this distinction. We want to emphasize how important this technology in particular is. And so we're making this sort of separate pitch.
I'm just curious, I know that you're new, but have you received any pushback from any organizations?
That is a good question. Well, part of the way we're modeling this campaign in terms of expediency has to do with an attempt to circumvent pushback to the best extent possible. So carbon nanofibers are a really, 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 really valuable material in textile manufacturing in nanotechnology. And they're already being used along with carbon nanotubes to construct larger scale objects like airplane bodies, or smaller scale objects like lithium ion batteries, which are used to charge iPhones, computers, tablets, car batteries, like the basic essentials of contemporary life. These batteries are responsible for powering, and they're composed of carbon nanofibers, or they can be. And they're used in all kinds of domains, but especially given the massive revolution coming in nanotechnology, we expect this commodity in particular to be one of, if not the most valuable building material on the market in the coming decades. So it's very, very pro-industry, what we're doing. Silicon Valley, large industries will be very interested in this product. So that's in terms of the endorsements we might get from industry. In terms of pushback that we might get from industries that typically push back against climate initiatives, we don't expect to get as much, because what we're asking for, which is basically, we want to get enough funding to the STEP technology so that they can scale up the technology and install it on a major world desert, maybe in one or multiple installations, at a large enough scale so that it can pull out the amount of carbon dioxide required. The amount of space that this will require, according to the calculations of the LIC group, is roughly 10% the size of the Sahara Desert. This will happen on a major world desert. So as opposed to like agricultural sequestration or other forms of carbon capture, this takes up very, very little space. And it doesn't interfere with the practices of coal industries, oil industries. They can, I mean, we don't want them to continue doing what they're doing, obviously, but they can continue what we're doing simultaneously in tandem with a STEP installation. Basically, all STEP is doing is pulling the CO2 out, and we're not asking for an alteration in industrial practice. So we don't expect a whole ton of pushback from them. There might be an effort to get STEP plants installed on the exhaust emissions on power plants. We'll see how that goes in terms of pushback, but depending, that also, will depend on the political ramifications of the situation. If there's tax breaks or incentives for industry to lower their carbon output, maybe they'll want it. But otherwise, we're really interested in reducing atmospheric. That's something we really, really want to emphasize, because most, if not all of the initiatives currently at play, especially politically, deal with reducing future outputs, future carbon emissions. We want to put caps on that and convert to new renewable technologies, solar, wind. We should be doing that. But according to the broad consensus in climate science, we have crossed the proverbial tipping point of CO2 that's already in the air. We've crossed 400 parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and we're not going back below that by just cutting emissions. The only way to go back is to take the CO2 out of the atmosphere that's already in the atmosphere. And so that's imperative, and we need a technology that can do that quickly and efficiently. And STEP seems to be, as it stands, the best possibility.
I agree. This is amazing.
Yeah.
This is really, really cool. I guess until now, I didn't really process, not only are you solving a problem, but you're also then creating a product that helps the world from the problem that you're fixing.
I want to take a moment really quick to thank anyone and everyone who's given me support and motivation, encouragement, and feedback as I've been creating this series. I have several patron supporters now, which is amazing, so I want to thank those who are now official publishers of the Belief books. First, Hyundai Naaman, and second, Mark Naaman, and Bill Marpom. So, thanks to you guys for supporting me at the publisher level. I only hope I can express my thanks and give back with the work I do for this series to all of you, so thanks to all of you. This episode's shout out goes to Stephen B. Long on Twitter. He says this: "Your podcast is lovely. Keep up the good work." Short and sweet, but serious motivation for me. So thanks, Stephen. I appreciate it. While we're on a short break from my conversation with Fergus, I figured I'd play a message from an amazing sponsor of mine, Citizens Climate Lobby, who are doing huge things to act on climate change and figure out this problem that we're having. So here's some information on that. It won't take too long.
The climate is changing. Extreme weather is disrupting livelihoods and food supplies around the world. This is observed. This is documented. This is the scientific community's consensus. The climate is changing. Carbon emissions are driving that change. Emissions come from burning fossil fuels. So if we want to slow or even reverse the change, we must lower our fossil fuel use. By charging a fee on fossil fuels and returning that revenue to households as a dividend, we can do just that, starting a chain of positive effects. Fossil fuels become less desirable. Cleaner sources of energy become more competitive. The dividend creates millions of jobs. Carbon emissions go down, reduced air pollution saves tens of thousands of lives, and climate change is brought under control. We can make this happen, but enacting a carbon fee and dividend isn't in our hands, it's in theirs. How do we sway them? What can we do? We can use our voices to express political will and demand action. We must help our elected leaders work together. It's on us to tell them what we want as a group. Because when voices call out together, their impact multiplies. Government can respond to the will of the people, provided we tell the government what we want. And what we want is a livable world. This is what Citizens Climate Lobby works for. To empower citizens to connect with and influence their members of Congress. To spread the idea that each one of us can address climate change. Bring your voice to citizensclimatelobby.org.
So, plastics are the current building commodity of our era. Whether or not STEP happens, this is a phenomenon that is more or less inevitable. There will be a nanotech revolution, and there will be the composite materials of that revolution will be nanofibers and will be nanotubes. So it's coming. The question is, how can we make them efficiently? How can we make them cheaply? STEP can do that. The current methods of creating carbon fiber, carbon nanofibers are very, very expensive and not very time efficient. And so on the one hand, STEP offers a process that by miles beats the competing methods of creating these products. But on the other hand, it has the capacity to reverse the climate change situation in the process. That isn't to say that there aren't concerns that might come along with the product. It's important to note that they're coming regardless. So we need to anticipate toxicity, any regulations that need to be set in place. We've heard from studies that if nanotubes are beyond a certain length, they then become toxic if inhaled. So we want to make sure that as this goes on, we get the appropriate regulations in place so that the lengths are regulated. But in comparison to plastics, in terms of biodegradability and overall hazard, it's not even close. These materials are much, much, much better for our health and for the environment.
So cool.
Super cool. Super cool.
For someone who doesn't know or knows very little about this industry or nanofibers or even what the relationship between CO2 and atmosphere is, what is the basic explanation of this is what STEP does?
The entire process of STEP takes place inside of a chamber. So this chamber could be the size of a coffee cup. In fact, you could actually use a coffee cup if you want to do a small scale STEP, experiment. So in the coffee cup, you would fill up the cup with this chemical compound called lithium carbonate. And you want this lithium carbonate to be heated at a very, very high temperature. When you heat something to a very, very high temperature, it makes the process of a chemical reaction go faster. So that's why you want to heat the lithium carbonate. So you got the cup, the lithium carbonate is in the cup, and then in the cup are two electrodes. There's an electrode on top and an electrode on bottom. And that's the entire composition of a STEP plant. That's it. It's very, very simple. So what happens is the lithium carbonate is actually able to absorb CO2 right out of the atmosphere. Or in the case of an exhaust plant, you could hook it up to the exhaust plant and the lithium carbonate would absorb the CO2 from there. The CO2 goes in to this cup with all this stuff. The lithium carbonate increases the concentration of the CO2. So there's more present in a given space. And then the CO2 interacts with the upper electrode to produce oxygen, and it interacts with the bottom electrode to produce carbon, and in this case, carbon nanofibers, as sort of the byproduct that just happened accidentally when they were doing these experiments. So oxygen's being made on top, carbon nanofibers are being made on bottom, and the entire thing is run on solar energy. So the entire thing is 100% energy efficient. You don't use any CO2 to allow the process to run. So that's sort of the basic gist of the process. So carbon dioxide is CO2, carbon, oxygen, 2 oxygen. And so basically what's happening is that's just being split. Oxygen and carbon. Oxygen on top, carbon on bottom. And then the negative effects of CO2 are no longer happening because the molecule's been split and it's no longer dangerous.
And that's it. That's the
That's
solution.
it. So you could make this yourself. In fact, you can go on YouTube and you can see a do-it-yourself version of a step plant. This guy had his own sort of medium-sized chamber that he made. You could make it yourself if you know enough about how this all works. So this could happen in a coffee cup, or it could happen in something the size of a skyscraper. It can grow and scale, and we ultimately need to get it to grow and scale and learn how to engineer larger and larger installations of a step plant.
Have you created one?
No, I'm not qualified. I might try at some point, but we expect that to go disastrously, but it would be fun.
So currently, what's the biggest model that the Licht Group has created?
So they've managed to get to the point where they can take CO2 out of the atmosphere and produce 10 grams of carbon nanofiber per hour. And that level of output is scaled up over 100 times from their original yield. So they were originally producing 0.1 grams of carbon nanofiber per hour. They're now able to produce 10 grams. And they've done it without any loss in energy per unit mass of the material. No loss in energy in the process of making larger amounts of nanofibers. So it's a positive sign, which means, potentially you could scale up larger and it would remain just as energy efficient as it has been already, which is extremely energy efficient. We still need more research. We still need chemical engineers to scale it up and see how it goes in larger scales and larger dimensions. We need it to be, thousands, hundreds of thousands times larger than it currently is. And so that's where we're coming in, trying to leverage a following and access conglomerates that could potentially offer hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars toward the research and scaling development of the technology.
Yeah, I was just about to ask. I was thinking, so what are your short-term plans for, okay, tomorrow I'm going to wake up, I'm going to do this over the next weeks. What about in a year?
We set our goals to be potentially as ambitious as they could be realistically. So we want to get to the point where we've accessed the largest conglomerates by the end of this year. Maybe it'll take more than that. Maybe it'll take 2 years, 3 years. But our near-term goals are to access our initial donors. So our asking price will be in the range of 100,000 directly to the Licht Group. It won't run through Climo at all. We're just trying to mediate the relationship between these donors and the Licht Group. So we'll be asking them for that sort of range of a subsidy. And as a byproduct of that subsidy, we'll be asking for a couple thousand toward the Climo campaign, which we'll use for marketing. But we don't want these donations, especially initial donations, to happen in a vacuum. We don't want it to just be that and then it doesn't lead to anything else. So what we're going to do is organize these public live events, which will include the Licht Group, Climo, the initial donors, and media organizations, so that these initial donations happen symbolically. Because we don't expect donations in that range to significantly expedite the STEP technology. But what they can do is expedite the Climo campaign. So if it shows, someone has really invested in this must be legitimate, and they're doing this as part of this larger campaign, we feel like that can catalyze our movement toward higher levels of attention and grow our following much, much more. And we'll be doing a series of these events. And once we've grown a large enough following, we want to run what we call contact weeks, where we say, okay, this week, as many people as we can get from our followings on social media, we say, everybody contact the Breakthrough Energy Coalition this week, ask them to subsidize STEP by X dollar amount once we've decided. And so hopefully Breakthrough Energy that week will be bombarded by phone calls, emails, messages on their Facebook, and they'll get the message and they can then turn their attention toward the technology and potentially subsidize it. There are many, many conglomerates that will be trying to access this way, but the bigger following we have, the more we can leverage it to run campaigns like that.
It all sounds smart. Like, it seems very well thought out about how you've created the organization strategically, as well as those what did you call them?
Contact weeks. So that it's very focused and honed in on one group on a particular week. So it's not like a month where it can kind of be scattered, and it's not just a day where not enough happened. We'd say probably a full week would be enough to get the attention of an organization. Breakthrough Energy, as the example I used, is a billion-dollar conglomerate that was founded by Bill Gates and a number of billionaires in 2015, and they subsidize emerging clean technologies. That's what they do.
First of all, have you had any time to do a contact week, or have you started to reach out to any of these groups, or is this in the future?
So we can't run contact weeks on that scale at the level of following we have 2 months in. In the meantime, we are trying to hone in on smaller conglomerates. One in particular, the Alt-E Fund, is a very recent startup that is going after emerging technologies, and we might want to coordinate with them. And there are several smaller organizations and just philanthropists in general who we are connected to, or people connected to are connected to, who we're trying to expose the material to, see if they might be interested in making a contribution.
That's great. So are you mainly using social media to gather this following?
Yeah, so we're running a public campaign, and we're running operations behind the scenes to sort of access our own network of contributors that may or may not be interested. So as it goes with the public, garnering a following among activists and people who are interested in doing climate work, and maybe people who are interested in technology and groundbreaking technology, that will happen primarily through social media and through video campaigns and education.
Yeah, we met on Twitter.
We did meet on
I found
Twitter,
you guys
yeah.
on Twitter.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Very powerful tool now.
It is, yeah. That's part of what we're doing now. You know, the whole thing is ride the wave of industry, ride the wave of nanotech, ride the wave of technology, and ride the wave of philanthropists. These avenues exist. And same goes for social media. You can start an organization from scratch and be a really legitimate force without really having to pay a lot of money or have a lot of clout from the offset, just because of the facilities that are available now online.
Do you think that the internet and social media, do you think that there's more of a concern about climate change? Do you see that as being a wave, or do you think people are going to continue to not care about it? Which way do you see that teeter-totter fall?
Well, okay, it's hard to say if there's a causal thing there. There is more of a concern about climate change among the public than there has been in the past. So the recent Gallup poll of 2016 found 65% of the country, the United States, is concerned about climate change, which is higher than it used to be. So whether that's a product of social media or not, you know, it's hard to say. But one thing social media does provide is an outlet of community, of coordination and communication. So even if you're a niche group, you know, even if it was like 30% of the country, we can become aware of who that entire 30% is just through social media contact. And that makes us, you know, if we leverage that correctly, an extremely powerful force. So we're not that concerned with the lack of interest at large. You know, there is a lot of disinterest in climate change and as a phenomenon, or as a real life-threatening phenomenon. But it's more or less irrelevant to our initiative to what extent they have that opinion and they have their own messaging network. We have enough at our disposal to make what we want to have happen.
So you don't see climate change deniers and people who are denying what's going on as getting in your way at all?
No, I don't. Because of the avenue we've taken. Maybe that avenue was carved by the deniers even. No, I think we can accomplish it without them. I think obviously, if they didn't exist or if they agreed with us, then we could probably do it faster. But I don't think we would be in this situation in the first place if they agreed with us. I think we would have been in a situation where we would have had political action take place by now.
What has stopped that action from happening?
I think it's easy to understand where it comes from. And I don't even separate myself from the world of denial as much as other environmental activists do, because I understand it on a psychological level. I think you have a situation where, on a microcosmic level, even as someone who cares about climate change, there's a part of your mind that is in denial about it because it doesn't feel like it's really happening. You go outside and everything feels normal. And so the urgency is kind of downplayed just because of that visceral engagement that I and anyone else has, no matter how much we intellectually or rationally do think about this and care about it. So you could only extrapolate from that if that's how we engage with it, just on a feeling level, it's hard to really feel like this is real. Then of course that dynamic would play out on a macrocosmic level, and that you would have similar proportions and contingents of people throughout the country or throughout the world who would also be in denial. They would just represent that part of the psyche fully as human entities. So it makes sense that it exists, especially in the hub of the industry that begat climate change in the first place, which is really the United States, where the Industrial Revolution took place and where the hubs of industries are located. And now, given our international power, where regulations really matter.
Yeah, that's a great breakdown. What can be done to make the problem tangible for people? How can someone learn or become aware that when I walk outside, yes, it feels right, but there's something wrong?
Well, I don't know. Beyond a in-person visitation to areas that are already affected, so if you wanted to go take a trip down to Chile and witness what's happening to their forests, or if you wanted to take a trip to South Asia and witness the turmoil that water droughts if you wanted to take a trip to the Arctic and see the erosion that has taken place, there's a chance that an in-person visitation could elicit some kind of an emotional response. That said, I don't think you can do it until it happens. And even then, there might be a certain disconnect, If you're someone who is afflicted with lung cancer, there's all kinds of denial that can take place in that situation, especially leading up, before you're even diagnosed with that illness in your life. And there have been efforts made to make PSAs showing what happens to your bile, what happens to your lungs when you smoke for this many years, what happens to your throat, And it makes you feel kind of uncomfortable, but the levels of people smoking at large in the world, it varies from place to place, but there's massive amounts of people who continue to do it, despite the knowledge, despite the PSA, I don't know if you can have that big of an impact on that level. To a degree you can. It's more about harnessing what you do have, harnessing the people who already know, people who already agree, and turning that into a collective force toward action and tangible results that you need to make happen. I think too much emphasis has been placed on trying to convince the people that don't agree. I think you can do that to an extent, but it won't result in a lot of what we need to make happen. We have enough already. We have enough.
So it's really about harnessing the people who are aware, are awake, know about what's going on, and harnessing those numbers to do something about it.
I mean, look at the effect that the Koch brothers, as two individual human beings, have had on our political scene in the United States. They're just two people, and they have a lot of money. Well, we have a lot of money too. We have Bill Gates, we have Mark Zuckerberg, we have Tom Steyer, we have Nat Simmons. We have tons and tons of money interested in combating climate. And at the time being, people like Leonardo DiCaprio, Nat Simmons, are doing great educational content. But what if we could also use that money toward tangible results as it pertains to our climate and harnessing technologies and the science that already exists, and furthering those technologies with the money they have?
You answered a question that I was just about to ask you about what is an example of a different situation where people deny something's happening and then realize it. Smoking is a perfect analogy to what's going on. Until someone is now diagnosed with lung cancer, or they can't breathe well, do they realize, oh, there's a problem. But up until that, there's a problem. But until it's visible or right in their face, do they actually maybe accept it?
And that analogy doesn't just apply to deniers or smokers. That analogy applies to us as well, because we're in a situation now where we have been diagnosed with lung cancer. We have been diagnosed with CO2 content in the atmosphere. We know we're past the tipping point. And the intuitive solution that has been offered by politicians and activists on the left and people even interested in combating this has generally been in the ballpark of let's cut emissions. But that would sort of be the equivalent of taking someone who has lung cancer and telling them, okay, stop smoking. You know, that would be a good thing for them to do at that point, obviously, but that doesn't get rid of the cancer. You need to start taking more extreme, probably experimental measures. Try to find experimental routes to get rid of the cancer. And that's what we're doing with STEP in conjunction with Climo. We need a tunnel vision. This isn't a prototypical solution because we're not in a prototypical situation. We have a time window and we're already past the tipping point. We need to reverse what's happened, not just cease the continuation.
One of my big questions with people is it too late to undo the damage? But like you said, the smoking analogy, it's not like, okay, stop smoking. It's like, here's what we're gonna do to battle the cancer. So I think that's fantastic. I want to get to what people can do with your organization, where they should go and things like that. But before I get there, I wanted to know what would change your mind that climate change is a reality?
Well, you know, I think to be intellectually rigorous to the fullest extent and being intellectually curious and open-minded person, you cannot forego the possibility that climate change is not as severe as being projected or is a phenomenon that is a threat at all. Of course, it needs to be on the docket of possibilities, and especially if you're being scientifically rigorous, they're always looking to falsify what they're doing. Upwards of 90% of climate scientists surveyed over the course of the last 2 decades have consistently affirmed the idea that climate change is an impending threat and is a man-made phenomenon. There's debate about the 97% number, but it's upwards of 90%. So that leaves a very, 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 very tiny contingent of climate scientists that don't believe it. To what extent they're funded by industrial, that can be parsed out. But, what if it doesn't happen? Not much, there isn't a downside to preparing for something that is almost inevitable. If anything, if I were to tell you, if you want to take it back to the lung cancer analogy, they're not 100% sure, but they're 90 to 95% sure. You would get chemo or whatever. You would take the treatment. You wouldn't just say, because there is a 5% to 1% chance, I'm going to go with that. And maybe it turns out you don't have it. But at the very least, especially with regard to our initiative, you're producing carbon nanofibers, carbon nanotubes at a more efficient, cost-effective rate by far than is currently happening by processes available. So even if the CO2 problem was never a direct threat to us, you still access an amazing benefit from scaling the STEP technology that will help industry and capitalism even and quality of life going forward for the global community. So we have this dual avenue of the campaign that we can be pitching, and we are, depending on your proclivities. But this is massive. Climate change out of the picture. This technology is incredible, incredibly efficient, and incredibly energetically useful. Normally when you make nanofibers, nanotubes, you're using synthetic precursors or materials that you use to make those fibers. Here, it's all natural, degradable carbon dioxide. So there's plenty beyond the climate thing to be excited about with this.
Okay, you've piqued, I would imagine, one person's interest, whoever's listening or watching this. What can they do to get involved? Where should they start?
So the very, very best thing you can do is, as it happens, is to subscribe to our YouTube channel in particular. We have a lot of avenues of social media, but we feel like that will be down the road a primary hub of communication. And it's very easy to build an active community there. Twitter's good too, but it's very, very fast paced on Twitter. There, and YouTube, it's much more centralized, and you get a more personal connection to your viewership. There's a sort of derogatory term called slacktivism, which kind of came out of the woodwork in the last decade with all the internet stuff, all the online petitions and stuff, and people tend to criticize that mode of activism because it doesn't really accomplish anything concrete. So they call it slacktivism. You just click yes on a petition and then you feel absolved of duty, like you've done it and then nothing happens. In this case, just like we're riding the wave of all these other elements, we're riding the wave of slacktivism toward a real concrete solution. It's very, very easy for you to join this Climo movement. All you have to do is be a slacktivist. We'll happily take more from you. If you want to volunteer for us, you can go to climo.us/volunteer to actually work with us on various behind-the-scenes projects. Additionally, you can go to our website to sign up for membership at climo.us to just get our newsletter. And you can join us on Facebook and Twitter as well. But the number one spot where we would like to really harness and grow our following is on our YouTube page. So we will provide a link to that and get you easy access to the YouTube page. Beyond that, there are a lot of environmental activist communities. One of the people who really influences me in particular in the environmental scene is Josh Fox. He's a documentarian and activist. He's been making the point, don't start your own groups. There are all these other groups that could use more members. Because our initiative is so particular and so unique, we needed to start our own group. But there are plenty available. So in general, if you want to join a group, you don't have to join ours. There's a lot of people doing a lot of great things. And the more we focus and harness the community into a generalized direction, the more we can accomplish in the near term. The long term, we can do whatever we want in all kinds of places. But the near term, get those CO2 levels down, really got to focus.
Absolutely. I'd say that's a good spot to end, unless you had anything.
Let's get Owen up here.
That sounds good.
This is truly incredible. It's revolutionary, and I'm totally on board. So here I am plugging Climo, hopefully enough for you to jump on board or just share that this is a thing. Share this episode, do what you can, subscribe. Climo's overall strategy for supporting this step technology is super smart, and the idea of these contact weeks is something I think many organizations could adopt if they don't already do something similar. So check out climo.us for more information on this amazing technology and how you can get involved. More links will be in the show notes of the episode. And thank you for listening to the third episode of the Belief Books. Thank you to Fergus Baumann for inviting me to New York and for spreading the word about this revolutionary technology. Stay tuned for a future episode where I talk with the active member of Climo, Owen Campbell, to get his take on STEP, activism, and climate change denial. So an early thank you to Owen. And if you like what I'm doing, you can support me for as little as $1 per month on Podbean's Patron program. You can find more information about how that works and what you get on Podbean, or the support page of thebeliefbooks.com. If you look, you'll find it. It's really simple, and it will go a long way to helping me do this more and to do it better. You can also connect with me on Facebook and Twitter and even Reddit, or directly on the website where you can listen to more episodes and find more information and resources. Leave a comment on this episode to keep the conversation going. Leaving a review on iTunes is also pretty cool, just saying. Or if you prefer, just send me a direct message and let me know what you think. We can keep it private. I also was recently invited to be on the Theology Corner Network, which is a network of theological-themed blogs and podcasts. So I'm on there with 40 other contributors talking about the bigger questions. Check my page and the others out at theologycorner.net. And if you or someone you know would like to be a guest on the podcast, please just email me at beliefbooks@gmail.com. I'll see you on the next episode of the Belief Books.